weeks, and there is a new one which I'll go over in just a little bit. All right. Good job, Jerry. You're awesome. Good job. Good job. All right. So we're going to go last few weeks. I hope you watched it. If you have not seen the last 2 weeks, you're going to want to see them. You're going to. It's all on polytheism. Sounds stupid, but it's very important because the whole entire Old Testament is all based upon polytheism. Okay, from the time where Abraham comes to the time where Malachi. Now, granted, they didn't have as much problem after about 530. Once they got back to the land, but the problem still existed. So, please make sure you do that. We're going to finish a couple things up here, and then we're going to go into history and geography. You think to yourself, well, that's really boring. Why should we do that? Well, let me tell you, the whole entire Old Testament is all about different people, different places. If you don't know who Babylon, you don't know who Assyria, who Damascus, you don't know who Tyre, Sidon, all of those guys, you don't know who any of those guys are, you're going to be lost when you read the prophets. Period, point blank. You're going to be completely lost with reading them because the prophets came for a reason, and the guys we're going to be talking about today is usually the real reason why they did it. So, let's get going. Now, to finish things up, one thing I wanted to make sure I did is go over the two things that we talk about a lot in the Bible, which are high places and Asherah poles. Now, I know it sounds dumb, but the reality is high places is mentioned over 100 times. Okay, well, we should know by hermeneutics that when hermeneutics says if something in the Bible is spoken 3 times, you got to pay attention to it. When something says over 100 times, I think you get the picture. So we have to understand that high places and Asherah poles is spoken over 30 times. Okay, if you don't know what those two things are, you're about to learn. Good stuff. All right, so in Deuteronomy, God said, break down their altar, smash their sacred stones, burn their Asherah poles in the fire, cut down the idols, their gods, and wipe out the name of those places. God said, hey man, you can't do this stuff. We're going to go much more deeply into this next week about what God said, what not to do, what to do, because it's going to set us up when we get into the prophets and we start with Solomon, Ahijah, Rehoboam. Those guys, it's all about this stuff. Okay? So basically the key is, and this is part of your homework that I gave you guys, God told them to do it a specific way. God's very, very specific. And there's one of your homework is the way in there. We talk about the way, the truth, the life in Christ. But the key is that we have to understand that God says you have to do it. Yes, Lord. Oh, sorry. Just a joke. I was like, who's the sound? You guys remember, Anyway. But anyway, so the thing is, God says he has a specific way to do it. In the Old Testament, the specific way was, don't do this. Do it in the place I tell you to, in the way I show you, and you're going to find out next week why that's so important. Because when he did say do these things, it was for a reason. Now, so God says don't have these things. Now, by the way, when we go from the Old Testament where God says do it in this place, do it in this way, we go to the New Testament where we now have the way of being Jesus. There is no other way to do it. Either you go through him or you don't go at all. That's the key. Same with here. God was never changed. In the Old Testament, either you do it in the place I tell you to, in the way I tell you to, with the people I tell you to do it with, or you don't do it at all. So, 25% of the original inhabitants were still found in Canaan. What that means is that, guys, when they came in to take the land, if you ever read Judges, they didn't kill everybody. There was a lot of people they left. Some of them they subjected to hard labor and stuff like that, but they didn't do it. So here's the problem. God said, get rid of all of them. And the reason is for this thing. If you don't get rid of if you don't get rid of the original inhabitants, they're going to cause major problems on down the line. And I guarantee you, they caused major problems. Okay? So, God said, get rid of them. And so, let's talk about synchronism. Religious synchronism basically is combining of two faiths into one. I always tell people about Chrislam, where Islam and Christianity are combined. There are a lot of churches out there that do that. Islam, Christianity, or as the view would say, oh, that doesn't matter what God you as long as you worship something. No, you can't do it. You either go through Jesus or you don't. So we can't combine religions, but that's what they did. So the idea of the Asherah poles, standing stones, and the high places was that they combined things together constantly. It's called synchronism. Incorporated two of the same things. So what that really meant was that the big one was Yahweh versus Baal. Baal, that was a huge thing. Would you think when Elijah went on Mount Carmel to do that big old fight with those guys, it was all about this? Constantly, God is saying, why are you serving these people? See, the prophets basically said, First Psalm says, I hate double-minded people. That means you're doing both things. You're playing both sides of the fence. Samuel said, now the reason why I'm saying Samuel, because we're going to go back to about 1000 BC here. Samuel said in 1000 BC, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourself of the foreign gods. By the way, when Samuel said this, the people did not have a king yet. This was before the king, these guys were doing it. Okay? So listen to this. So the Israelites put away their Baals and Asherahs. Okay. Then in Kings, in the 7th century, 400 years later, look what it said. Worship the Lord. It is he who delivers you from your enemies. But they will not listen. However, persistent in their former practices. Former practices means they did the things that the people before them did. While these people were worshiping the Lord, they were serving their idols. To this day, 400 years later, their children and grandchildren continue to do as their ancestors did. This was a problem. Okay? We have the same problem today in the United States. We need to live for Jesus, but there's a lot of other influences out there that gets us wanting to go over this direction, this direction, this direction. We cannot play both sides of the fence. He said right here, Samuel said, you got to make a choice. If you're going to return with all your heart. So the people were playing both sides of the field. So let's talk about high places. So several kings, even when the kings came, they didn't necessarily get rid of some of this stuff. I think some of it was really political because, let me tell you, there is never a time in American history that everybody followed God. If you went through my Christian history class, it was at maximum, about 60%. So one of the things is a lot of the people were serving these other gods. And when the kings came in, I kind of felt for them. Guys like Jehoshaphat and Asa and those guys, they came in, they didn't really get rid of all of it. Most likely because there was probably a lot of people doing it. By the way, the Asherah poles is Asherah. So let me tell you just a little bit about Baal and Asherah. We talked about Baal. Remember the Baal cycle? Baal dies every year. Or gets defeated, his sister has to come help him out and get him back. Every year this happened with Baal. People thought, oh, Baal's gone. Thus the reason why when we go on Mount Carmel with Elijah, he's saying, maybe he's sleeping. Maybe he went on a vacation. We talked about that. They really thought that. The gods went on vacation. They were sleeping. They committed crimes. The gods these people worshipped were not nice beings, I wouldn't call people beings. But remember, everything that the gods were doing, and they patterned everything after whom? Themselves. Everything's about us. Anthropomorphism. We go here. It's all about me. The gods were all about them. So when they created all these ideas of the gods, they became whatever the people were. But that's the reason why in the first 3 commandments, God says, no other God but me, no images of me. Okay? All right. So the high place. So what Asherah trees were was it was more of a kind of like a druidic. If you guys know anything about druids, the tree huggers and all this stuff, what they would do is they would take a tree and they would create like a totem pole of Asherah. Asherah is interesting because you got to remember when we're talking Asherah, which was a female, and Baal, which is a male, female. They are considered what they call consorts, meaning they were together. They were a couple. One was worshipped along with the other, and they did it together. But remember, if you did your homework and specifically about who is God, God is neither female nor male. He is spirit. So anything we try to make God as is something akin to creation. So the thing is, even though these guys did some of this, they did not eradicate these places. Does anybody know how, out of 40 kings, this is post-Solomon, out of 40 kings, how many kings actually got rid of all of it? Everything. How many? Anybody? Huh? 2! Yeah! Good job! 2 of them. Hezekiah and Josiah. So the high places. Basically, the high places were really the places where they did the sacrifices. Now, I put in there the Ark of the Covenant because the Ark was where God said you got to do sacrifices. You got to do sacrifices at these particular cities. They were the sanctuary cities. They were the places that they would go, and this is where they would actually do the sacrifices. There was a total, I believe, 7 of them throughout Israel. So it wasn't just at one place. They had a few. You literally can go all over the place. However, 3 times a year, you have to go to the Ark of the Covenant, and you need to come together for the festivals. It was all about looking to God, focusing what God wants, who he wants you to do, how he wants you to do it, everything else. So the high places, they did this. But the problem is God said, don't do it here, because he wanted us to obey him. Why did he make us do all those things? Well, because he wants us to obey him. He wants us to know, because if you start messing around with this other stuff, you're going to start going this direction and keep going this direction, keep going. We've got to do it God's way. And I know it's hard, but it's one thing we have to do. However, all of this, and this is the segue into the geography and history, is all the above negatively impact the people of Jacob. Now remember, when I said the people of Jacob, who am I speaking of? Anybody? All of them, yeah. Because remember, all the tribes came from Jacob. So anytime in the Bible you read Jacob, talking about everybody. If you're talking Ephraim, you could be talking about 10 different tribes. If you're talking about Judah, you're talking about 1 or 2 different tribes. That's the way. It was really kind of crazy about that. But that's how they did it. So they became easy prey. But let me tell you something. This is the problem that we find. So Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. Nothing. Everything that happened back then is going to happen today. Even though the kings could come and make these good sweeping changes, the next king who comes are going to bring it right back to where they were before. And almost always, it's very rare that 2 good kings happen in a row. So beware, whoever you're supporting, just remember, it doesn't matter all the things that people are doing, the next person's going to come by and get rid of it. Happen this way back all the time. So if you read the Kings, focus on that. I promise you're going to see that they did these nice changes and wonderful changes, but then all of a sudden the next guy comes in and things get back to where it was before. Sadly, what happened is that they continued to go down, 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 down to the point where they were destroyed. By the way, one reason why they were destroyed is because they couldn't get along. If all of Israel could have fought together, instead of these tribes here, they could have did a lot better against their enemies. Same with us today. Time and time in history, you don't get along as a country, the enemies you become easy prey of the enemies. All right, so let's talk about that. There are 13 tribes. You're like, 13? I thought there were 12. Yes, there are. Actually, there are 12 in a sense. There are 13. Now, if you count all these guys in here, we find 12. Who is the 13th tribe that's not on the map? Anybody? Levi! Who said that? Woohoo! Good job, Levi. Yes, because Levi did not get a specific place. This is going to be a big problem for Levi because when they split and the other guys say, we don't need Levi's, we just create our own guys, Levi's had to say, I either going to leave or go with these guys. So Levi had some problems with that. But the half tribe of Ephraim, half tribe of Manasseh came from Joseph. Remember Joseph, the most important guy? By the way, Manasseh and Ephraim got the two best places of all of them. They really did. Ephraim is actually the most fertile soil of the whole place. And Manasseh, you can see a lot of land there. All right, this is a little map. I created this myself. I took a regular map and I threw a bunch of stuff in. If you want, I can send this to you. This could help you to study because you'll find out where everybody lives and what everybody's going. So the thing is, for instance, the original, today's terms is in there, but I added all of the different cities where they're located in the Old Testament. This could help you. So if you want it, I easily can send it to you because I think it'll help you. All right, these are the tribes of Israel. Okay, this is the way it was supposed to be, for the most part. All right, let's talk about the Assyrian Empire. All right, these guys were not good guys. You want to talk about evil, these guys were evil. Okay, you're talking, you look back at the Nazis and Hitler, he was evil. These guys they're up with those guys of how evil they were. They were terrible, terrible people. But they were the very first to conquer a large amount of land. They also became the biggest problem for Israel and Judah together. Now remember, Assyria is the one who took all of Israel's people into captivity. Not all at once. They actually did it over multiple times, over about a 15-year period. But Assyria was the one who did that. Assyria was on the gates and literally wiped out all of Judean cities. And by the way, the only people who stood up to Assyria was one guy. Everybody know which king stood up to Assyria? Hezekiah. Because Assyria, by the time anybody after that, Assyria was defeated soon after that. But Hezekiah stood up to them. And he was the only one to really stand up to them because they literally went and defeated all their cities. And then they were knocking at the door saying, you give us everything. And he gave him everything. And then he's like, we're going to kill you. And God said, not going to happen. So Hezekiah actually stood up to these guys and won. These guys are pretty evil. All right. Assyria existed for over 1,000 years, but these are their main guys. And again, I highly recommend you know these guys because if you know where these people we're talking about here, you can see where all the problems happened. And if you can see through this, 745, to 627. The reason that's only about a little over 100 years. That's the only extent of that these guys had over Israel and Judah, around 100 years. Okay? So, and the reason why I put this in here is because when the prophets began to come, now Elijah and Elisha came 100 years prior to this, but the prophet books that we study started around 750. God started speaking to the people. Why? Because he needed to. That's why this is important. God spoke to the people during that time through the prophets during this whole entire time. The prophetic books are all basically starting around 750. And what's interesting about it is, around 750, when God starts getting really, really strong with the people saying, hey, you guys better change or else it's not going to be good for you. So one thing to understand about the prophets, almost all the prophets, they came about between 10 to 30 years prior to a major catastrophe. Now, we're not talking Elijah and Elisha. We're going to do those guys in a couple weeks. They were actually long before that. But the prophetic books are all written mainly due to a catastrophe. Okay? That's important to understand that. So when you read a prophetic book, you need to understand the time it was written in. And that was why last week's homework I said, go and look up a few things, look up a few of the different prophetic books. When did they write them? Why did they write them? How did they write them? That becomes very important, because if you know who they're talking about, if you know when they were talking about to what was going on, your life is now much easier. By the way, this week's homework, I'm actually showing you how to use what we call the IVP background commentary. We'll go into this a little bit more, but this will actually help you to understand all of those things. All right. Now, Assyria was like the mob. Yes? Al Capone, Meyer Lansky, all these bad guys, they're all there. They were like the mob, because what they would do is they would come and they would defeat everybody around you and say, hey, they would perform the protection racket. We'll protect you for a price. Now, this price was a little exorbitant. Now, let me tell you, the mob had nothing on these guys. The mob, they give you, you get a price, but you can keep your store, you can do whatever, you just got to give me some of your money. Nah. When they took silver and gold, it wasn't measured in pounds or kilograms. It was measured in tons and thousands of kilograms per year. Per year. So we're talking, let's just say it's 2 tons of gold. Do you know how much money 2 tons of gold is? And guess what happens? They take it this year. Guess what they're going to come back for next year and the year after? These guys were bad, bad people. So which means these guys had to go out and mine and do all this stuff to get all the gold and silver and bring more gold and silver in. Tons of it. They took almost all of it. And if you didn't do it, it was not good. We'll get into that in just a minute. So both Israel and Aram, we'll talk about Aram next week, okay, Aram Damascus, they both look to Egypt constantly for this. Now you're going to find in this class, Egypt is hardly mentioned anymore, because Egypt they kind of lost a lot of their stuff. A lot of their stuff went away, so Egypt was never a major influence. Now, we still see that they did do some influence, but compared to Assyria, Babylon, everything, Egypt was nothing. Egypt was defeated by all the major powers. But the problem is, God said, do not go back to Egypt. Listen to what Isaiah says. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, who rely on the horses, who trust on the multitudes of their chariots, and the great strength of the horsemen, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel. This is very important to understand. And this is important for us, too. I'll never forget, I was watching, as you guys know, I watch a lot of live court proceedings. This one lady, she was just desolate, had nothing. And I thought to myself, this is really the idea. God, He wants us to look to Him for everything. God's mad at them because you're looking to the wrong God. They were looking to the Egyptian God instead of looking to their God. And remember, it's the same with us. If we need money, I better go work 3 jobs now, and I can't go to church anymore but I need money. But God said, no, look to me. Look to me. And that's what He was saying right here. And actually, I have thought about this. I've been thinking about this for months, this verse, because the reality is God says, stop looking to humans. That's the key. Don't look to humans. Okay? But the Egyptians are mere mortals and not God. Their horses are flesh and not spirit. Trust me, every time these guys look to Egypt, every single time they look to Egypt, they wish they wouldn't because they were defeated. So here comes Assyria. Oh, maybe Egypt can help us. God says, no, don't look to them. Let me do it. But they look to him anyway, and guess what? Bam, they were defeated. Every time. Except for Hezekiah that one time. Hezekiah didn't look to Egypt that time. He looked to God. Okay. When the Lord stretches out a hand to those who will stumble, those who are helped will fall. Meaning, you go to Egypt, you're going to fall. Stop looking at all these other guys. Although Egypt was once powerful, Assyria, Babylon, and Persian all defeated the land of the pharaohs. Every one of them, multiple times actually. And I'll tell you, the land of the pharaohs was continually defeated. Continually. So when we see how powerful Egypt was, it was prior to about 1400 BC, when they were still in captivity. Now, after that point, had almost nothing with it. So, the Bible says in Isaiah, remnant of Judah, the Lord has told you, do not go back to Egypt. Remember that, please. Because you're going to find in Jeremiah, you're going to find in Isaiah, you're going to find in the Kings, in Chronicles, that they're going to try to go back over and over again. God is basically saying, you got to stop looking to these guys. They're not going to help you. You've got to look to me. That's the point. So you got to understand, God allowed a lot of this stuff to happen. You wait till we get to Jeremiah when God really starts saying, this is my doing, and you better let him do it. Because God said, I'm the one who did this to you. Yeah. Why did God do it? Because he wanted them to come back. His goal was to have their hearts, to have them serve him. So whatever he takes them through, what does it matter? Because in the end, if by serving him, they can have life. And that's exactly what they got when they served him. But sadly, we find time after time after time that they didn't. All right. Josiah was picking the wrong fight. So what happened, Josiah, which was one of the two best kings, unfortunately, what he did not do is he did not consult God about Egypt. I just threw this in here, just kind of an extra thing. So Nebuchadnezzar basically defeated the Egyptian army at Sharkamesh. Well, that's going to happen. Right before that happened, Egypt was going through, and this is an interesting thing. This is the Egyptian Pharaoh supposedly heard from God, which I think it did because we find out it was true. What quarrel is there, king of Judah, between you and me? Pharaoh was going through Israel, and Josiah says, you're not going to come through my territory. And he's like, I'm just passing through. Let me do this. There was no problems. Egypt was mean, but this is where this is the reason why you always consult God for everything you do, because this turned out very badly. So basically what happened was, Josiah was killed by the Egyptian army. And it goes on to saying, God has told me to hurry, so stop opposing God. This is what Pharaoh was telling him. Who is with me, or he will destroy you? See, this is an interesting thing. The Old Testament can teach you everything. This is a good point to say, well, I don't care how close you are, you still need to seek God for everything. If Josiah would have sought him, God would have said, don't let him go through it. Because they would have walked right through. And they would have walked right through, no problems. But they didn't. He didn't. Even the great Josiah, which is one of the two best kings, still neglected to do that. So, sorry, just a little thing. So this is where it happened. All right. So again, this is what happens when you don't consult God. You've got to make sure you consult God always. Let me tell you, Hezekiah, the same thing happened to him. Babylon comes in while Assyria was in power. Babylon said, let me look at your riches and your temple and everything else. And Hezekiah's like, yeah, I love it. Great stuff. Yeah, we get to check out what we got over here. The problem is, as Isaiah the prophet basically came in and said, what are you doing, you idiots? You just let Babylon look at everything you own? And guess what? A prophecy And we'll talk about this later, but he gave a prophecy saying, you will lose everything. So God actually talked about, even through Isaiah hundreds of years before, that in the end, a few hundred years later, they're going to lose everything to Babylon. So we got to be careful. This is the second thing that happened. You got to be careful. You've got to seek God for everything. All right. Assyria did not play nice. They were gangsters. Gangsters are actually a nice way to say it. Not only did they invent siege tactics, that they flayed the skin. They peeled off the skin of their enemies and draped it over their city. They did some really, really bad things. These are the guys who began forced deportation. You don't like what we're doing? We're going to move you to somewhere where you won't be able to complain about it anymore. Remember, the beatings will continue until the morale picks up. So, anyway, that was something my chief in the Navy used to say. This is pictures of Assyria. These are real-life pictures from Assyria. Extracting teeth, putting people on poles, flaying the skin. I'm telling you, these guys were not. But let me tell you something. All you got to do is say, hey, guess who's coming? Assyria. You mean the guys who flayed skin, pull your teeth out, put you on poles? We'll give them anything they want. That was the idea. They did it for a reason. And people were scared to death of them, and they should be. In 722, Sargon the Great, Sargon actually, the second, actually not Sargon the Great, that was actually years later. Sargon the second capture, Sargon the second, yes, captured the city of Samaria, taking its remnants. Basically, God predicted it through the prophets, and it happened. So Assyria took all of Israel. This is when Israel was gone. Did Israel return? No, not at all. Never came back. However, remember the first day we talked a little bit that God was prophesying through Jeremiah that he will get them back. He still cared about them. All right. So let's talk about aka Damascus and Syria. Now, Syria, this is like one of the worst things that the Greeks did to us. The Greeks did this. They started calling it Syria. Now everybody has a problem. Is it Assyria or Syria? They're completely different places. So that's the reason why I said this. In the Bible, most often they're called Aram, or they're called Damascus, which was the capital city. Okay? So Aram, Damascus, Syria, the capital city. All right. So it's kind of like what happened so if you guys know about the Septuagint, which was about 250 BC, they actually created a Greek Old Testament. So what they did is the Greeks changed a bunch of things. So like the word Palestine is not a people. It's just a name that the Greeks called it during the Greek occupation. They just called it Palestine, not this people. But leave it at that. So the Levant, Mesopotamia, Deuteronomy, Pentateuch, Syria, all of those things are by Greek origin. They happened after the Old Testament was completely finished. They came up with that. So just so you know, these are kind of more Greek type things. Now, if you go into the Torah, you're going to find that they don't call it Deuteronomy. They just call it the books of Moses. All right, Aram is a distinct people. Now, although Aram is mentioned numerous times in the Bible, as far back as David and Samuel, most of Israel's dealings with the city-state became during the reigns of Ahab and Jehu. Now, those are both Israelite kings. Aram did some stuff. They weren't a huge factor, but we will be dealing with them. So you've got to know the difference. So remember, Aram is Syria, which is also Damascus. Okay, as you can see there, if you can see up there that Syria, Aram, Damascus, all the same place. But reason why I'm doing this, to keep talking about that, is because in the Bible, they kind of simultaneously switch these names around all the time. So I don't want you to get confused. Here are the kings of Aram. Let's just say that, by the way, do you guys remember after what happened with Elijah at Mount Carmel? Elijah at Mount Carmel, God sent him down to the mountain of God in the Sinai Peninsula, 200 miles away. He sent him down there. And by the way, one of the things he told Elijah was, you are going to crown Hazael. God actually 100 years earlier said, you guys are going to crown this. God put Hazael from the king of Aram in his place. God did this. That's how important the prophets were. They actually went and did this stuff. Actually, that would be actually Elisha is the one who actually did it, and we'll talk about that story, about how that happened, but that's what happened here. All right. So Ben-Hadad was the bad guy. He was the guy who just caused a lot of problems. Hazael, the guy that caused a lot of problems. Please remember this. All right. God sanctioned Hazael as king of Aram, like we just talked about. And so the thing is, from that point, God says, I'm making you king. Isn't it interesting that God makes kings of non-Israelite people, too? It's important. God had very specific things he was doing. Okay, and here's Elisha meets Hazael. So one of those things also happens when Elisha went and told Hazael, you're going to become king. He also showed Hazael that God was actually, the whole thing about Aram and the reason why he did it was because God was actually going to use him like he was going to use Babylon to make things bad for the people so that they will turn back to him. See, that's the whole goal. Guys, the whole Testament, the goal is God wants your heart. God wants to do all these things for you. God wants you to look to him. And the things get hard, that's good. Because when things get hard, that means you can truly look at him. And let me tell you, when things get hard, where do you think these kings first turn to? Baal first, but then usually God. All right. Let's talk about the Neo-Babylonian Empire. We're almost done. Neo-Babylonian Empire. These guys were big. Huge, huge empire. They defeated Nineveh in about 615 or something like that. They defeated Nineveh. They took over, and we see the guy Nebuchadnezzar. That's really the big guy that we're always hearing about, Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Babylon existed for almost 1,500 years before Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? They wrote the Code of Hammurabi. That was a nice thing. Before 620, they would rise and fall numerous times. A lot of history there. They defeated Assyria, destroyed capital of Nineveh, 612 BC. Capital of Nineveh was destroyed. And their empire would last till about 539. Completely destroyed by that time. So they didn't last very long. But they were big, big influence. So in 586, the last of Judah's people were taken captive to Babylon. So the Babylonians literally did what the Syrians did by taking people captive. Okay? If you leave the people in their countries, they figured, these people are going to rebel. So take them in a place, put them somewhere, they can't do anything about it. By the way, Persia's going to stop all that. We'll go to that next week. So here's some of the guys. By the way, another thing I just want to show you guys about, not this guy. Let me go about these. All right. So see, it says Ashurbanipal down here. What the easy way? This is an easy thing to remember. All right, just know. So you know someone's a Muslim because their name is Muhammad, right? They know in Asher. Remember I gave you that from the homework. I gave you who are all the gods. Asher was the Assyrian god, so they called themselves Asher a lot. Same with Babylon. Marduk. Marduk was the Babylonian god. So when you hear of Ashurbanipal, you should know, oh, that's Syria. Okay? I mean, Assyria. If you hear Marduk, oh, that is Babylon. See, that's there's little key understandings that you're going to find in the Bible. All right. Tower of Babel was in the Bible. And I'm not going to go through this whole entire thing, but I recommend you reading Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah 14 talks about the king of Babylon. But just so you know, he wrote it in 730 BC, but if he wrote it in 730 BC, and Nebuchadnezzar did this in 586, that was 150 years earlier. Isaiah prophesied 150 years earlier and spoke very, very specifically about Babylon. Now, by the way, in this chapter, I highly recommend you read it, because in this chapter, Jesus actually uses this about talking about Satan. Now, some people say, well, Nebuchadnezzar, Satan. No, but Jesus used it. I saw you fall like lightning from heaven, Jesus said. But it's actually in this chapter, and it's talking about Babylon. So Babylon was a very, very, very... Now, I'm going to say what's interesting about this is they weren't as bad as Assyria. So when we get to when they finally take over, we now have a lot of stuff about it. Much more. We have a lot of writings about Babylon, more so than we do about Assyria, because we had Daniel. We had Ezekiel. We had Jeremiah. All three of those guys literally were doing things at the exact same time in three different areas. Ezekiel was in captivity. Daniel was in the palace of Babylon. And Jeremiah was in Jerusalem. All three, exact same time, saying the exact same things, prophesying very specific stuff. It's amazing. Wait till we get to that. It is amazing when you're looking at it going, oh my gosh, God had everything together. Ooh, pretty cool. So, they were highly active. Now, let's talk about Babylon in the New Testament. So, Babylon really is thought to be the most hated place. If you hear Babylon talked about in Revelations, well, and let me tell you, the reason why I think that this is true, because when Assyria took the Israelites away to captivity, they never came back, so there's no stories. When Babylon took the people away to captivity, they came back, so they had stories. So when you hear, Babylon was evil, Babylon was this, Nebuchadnezzar is bad, let me tell you, that's because they came back and told stories. So when you hear Babylon, everything that's bad becomes Babylon because that's what the people can remember. Assyria, think about it. No one came back. Everybody talks about Assyria. You don't ever said, darn Assyria, you Assyrian people. No, it doesn't hear nothing about that. It's all about Babylon. So in the New Testament, in Revelations. But the key is, Babylon, actually Revelations, is speaking of Rome. And the reason is because just as Nebuchadnezzar took the people of Israel captive, Rome did the same thing. By the way, did you know that Rome was invited into Israel? The Pharisees and the Sadducees couldn't get along. Pharisees invited them in about 70 BC. And then they complained about him afterwards. Oh, you guys, these evil things. Yeah, they were actually invited in. So the key is, when you read Babylon, it's all because of this. It's all because the people remember Babylon. They remember Nebuchadnezzar. They remember. So when you hear Babylon, they're talking about mainly, and I agree with Jeff, they're talking about Rome, because Rome had them captive at that time. And the idea is just as bad as it was for us when Nebuchadnezzar took us. See how everything the Bible relates to each other? Everything relates. So, by the way, the abomination that caused desolation, when you read that, a lot of people think that's Babylon. Well, it is. Well, it wasn't that he was talking about Babylon or about Rome. He actually wasn't. So, if people know about the abomination that caused, you probably heard the abomination that caused desolation in Daniel. The thing is, that was not talking about either one of those things. I just threw this in as kind of an extra thing. But what that was talking about was Hanukkah in the intertestamental period. So if you want to learn about that, I have 3 videos on the intertestamental period from about 4 years ago. Please watch them, and that's going to go over that. Because when Daniel talks about it, he's not talking about that being Babylon. He's actually talking about that being the Seleucid the Seleucid empires and the Ptolemies. All right. Babylon was defeated by Cyrus the Great in 539. We're almost done. Sorry, guys. 539, he defeated him. But what's interesting is that everybody already knew it was going to happen. Who prophesied the 70-year captivities? Who did that? No, not Isaiah. Jeremiah, yeah. Jeremiah said, you're going to be in captivity for 70 years. And they were. So basically, some people who knew Nebuchadnezzar, by the time Cyrus gets there, they were in their 70s and 80s. So they remember him. All right. Any questions? Sorry, I know this has been a whirlwind, but let me just tell you, this right here, this is the IVP. Now I thought about this. This is probably, I'm like, well, I hope he doesn't get mad that I'm using his information, but I have a purpose for using it, and that's to sell his books. Anyway, I'm not getting paid for this. But the thing is, what I use, the IVP background commentary for the Old Testament is one of the greatest things you can have. It's the best on the market. So what I did is to help you to understand it, is I gave you some of the things to read around that, and so you can see how important it is. I highly, highly recommend you get this. It's about $25. Okay, so I highly recommend it. So I put this in here because this has been invaluable. So other people, like you have the IVP, right? Yep, he has the IVP. Do you like it? Yeah. So I highly recommend it. So please go through this. This is all of the homework for the last few weeks. Is there any questions? Dun, 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 dun. All right, so you guys.